โมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนัมมัสสามิ Blessings on a windy, stormy Saturday night. In a few weeks' time, the Buddha statue that we made in just outside of Bangkok back in January will arrive in the port of Adelaide and go to Bodhipala Monastery, we hope without hitch or obstacle. And some Buddhists in Bangkok have offered Buddha relics to be installed in the cavity inside the head of the bronze Buddha statue. And that's a tradition. Just as the bronze Buddha behind where I'm sitting has many relics in the head that were installed about 15 years ago with Luang Por Anan. We'll do the same in Adelaide, so that when people come to see the Buddha and pay their respects to the Buddha, many people bow or lift their hands in Anjali. They'll actually be paying respects to relics of the Buddha. The relics are usually very small pieces from the bones of the Buddha, the body of the Buddha that was cremated all those years ago, and the ashes were collected and distributed to different kings, and no doubt later on to different monasteries and places around India, and then spread out around the world, even reaching Australia these days. And relics are usually, not always, but usually tiny pieces that are crystallized, sometimes of different colors, sometimes probably the most common are pearly white, but sometimes of different color. And it's said that the impression made by the pure mind of the awakened one, whether it's a Buddha or an Arahant, will or can over time affect the body, the physical body, have a certain purifying effect on it, so that when the body is cremated, the bones turn to relics. They crystallize, sometimes very quickly, sometimes very slowly, over many years or even decades. It's just one of those unusual phenomena that come from the action, the influence or the impression of the pure mind. And many Buddhists find them inspiring if they go to a stupa, which even the Buddha said we can build a stupa or chediya to house relics, or a Buddha statue that has relics in them, which is like a little stupa. They're a source of inspiration for people as they come to and recollect the Buddha. So seeing relics, paying respect to relics, we recollect the Buddha and maybe reminds us what a Buddha is. Who is a Buddha? What is a Buddha? What are the defining characteristics of a Buddha? And the Buddha is one who is, we say, fully awakened one who has purified their mind from delusion and ignorance, and freed their mind from greed, anger and delusion. So recollecting the Buddha, every time you recollect the Buddha, whether it's in a formal meditation, when people recite the word Buddho, or chant Itipiso, or if you're just thinking of the Buddha and the qualities of the Buddha, many people find it very uplifting for the mind, because you're reminding yourself that this awakened state is possible, and not just for a Buddha, but for, we say, any arahant, and that can be male or female student of the Buddha who's practiced the path and realized the truth, realized the Four Noble Truths, freed their mind from the causes of suffering. It's such a powerful reflection that it tends to uplift our mind, brings some joy, some happiness, brightens the mind. Another way they describe the awakened mind of an enlightened one, whether it's Buddha or an arahant, is mind that is free from the fetters, the 10 fetters that bind the mind to suffering, to the world, to the experiences of the world, based in greed, anger, delusion. And one of the effects of the practice that we do is to free our mind or unbind the mind from these fetters. So you could just make the comparison, like the mind. If the mind was a person, then if a person's fettered, that means they're tied down. So say you were kidnapped, and your kidnappers, they tied you down so you couldn't escape. And they get 10 ropes, and they tie your limbs and your neck and your torso down. To escape, you'd have to cut those 10 ropes. So the enlightened one or the awakened one has freed themselves from all ignorance and attachment by breaking through these fetters, 10 fetters. Perhaps the first 3 are the most important because they're the first 3 that you break through in your practice. So the person who's attained the first stage of awakening, we call a sotapanna, stream enterer. They've entered the stream of the Dhamma, and they've removed the first 3 fetters, which are Sakkaya Ditthi, personality view, or the view that this body and mind is a person, solid person or personality. The second fetter is doubt, so uncertainty about the practice. The practice does lead to awakening, can free our mind from delusion. Doubt about or uncertainty about what the path of practice is, whether we can do it or not, whether human beings can free themselves from suffering or not, and so on. The third fetter is called Silapata Paramasa, a kind of blind, deluded attachment to practices, rituals. So these 3 fetters are the first that are broken through the cultivation of the path of practice that the Buddha gave us. So they're probably the most important to focus on. The other ones are important as well to know about. So fetters of anger or ill will, sensuality, sensual desire, and desire and attachment for the states of jhana. So the jhanas based on forms, jhanas based on the formless, and then conceit, restlessness and ignorance. The first three fetters are what we're working with right now. Unless you're an arahant already, if you're unenlightened, that's what you're working with in your practice. It's what comes up every day for you, and you're probably already familiar with them, the uncertainty of the mind, the kind of perfunctory way we go about our business. Sila Patiparamasa often comes out in that way, just being perfunctory in the things we do, kind of just habitually doing things without full awareness, full understanding, full knowledge. And self-view, taking everything very personally. This body is me, mine, myself. My feelings, my thoughts are me, mine, myself. Which is probably the most obvious kind of suffering we fall into, isn't it? Taking everything very personally, so getting attached to the highs, the lows, the good, the bad, the views and opinions, the feelings and emotions, and the physical body. This is what we're dealing with every day. And you can imagine we're not going to cut through these fetters just like that. It's more a gradual process of wearing them away. So if you were that person kidnapped, you're bound to the chair by the ropes, you're going to be gradually rubbing them against something or other to cut through those ropes, get through them. It's unlikely you're just going to be able to snap them just like that. And that's one of the challenges of Buddhist practice, is you're just gradually wearing away these fetters that are fed by ignorance all the time. When our mind slips into delusion, attachment, wrong thinking. Sometimes we're even deludedly tying up the rope and the fetter more than before, tighter than before, helping our kidnappers because of our delusion. Rather than wearing away the fetters, we're tightening them, making them worse than before, because we don't realize what we're doing. So we attach to things, we get caught into, we say, craving and attachment, tanha, upadana, every day. And so sometimes we're actually reinforcing these fetters without realizing it. So the Buddha encouraged us to really reflect on our experience, establish awareness and reflect on our experience, and see how we are fettered to the world. This mind is fettered to the world and it brings suffering with it. The most obvious fetter way it manifests is just attachment and craving and attachment for the objects of our senses. So we're always looking for pleasant things to experience and getting bound up with that desire for the pleasant, for pleasure, for the pleasant things. Wanting more, wanting better, wanting newer, wanting different, and then getting stuck into aversion to what doesn't give us pleasure, or getting bored, even getting bored with the thing that used to give us pleasure. Our senses are always tricking us. And we're always caught into those desires that say, oh, if I get this, then I'll be happy. So we always want more things. Perhaps the most obvious one nowadays is just the pleasure of technology. Phones, iPads, tablets and computers. It's constantly going to digital technology, cell phones and so on, to get another little buzz, a little bit of pleasure, a little bit of interest or information or connection. And when you establish some awareness of that and reflect on it, you can see how easily we become addicted to technology. There's only one, but it's the most obvious perhaps. There's food and clothes and comfort and distraction in so many ways. All comes under the heading sensual pleasure. And the sense of self that forms around it. My pleasures. Often we have my guilty pleasure. We already feel there's something not quite right, so we have my guilty pleasure, my indulgence. And one of the reasons we're practicing mindfulness, whether it's in meditation or just in daily life, is to look at that process and see how we're constantly being trapped into our desires for pleasure and our aversion to what we find displeasurable, unpleasant, not to our liking. And it's one way of looking at the mind, how it gets caught into habits of seeking, getting obsessed with things, seeking more pleasure, more distraction, more things to fill our senses and our mind. Often we say the highest kind of pleasure, the best pleasures are the ones that fill up our senses the most. Ajahn Chah used to say romantic love and sexual desire is probably the most fulfilling kind of pleasure. It fills you up to the point of forgetting everything else. But the same with, say, intoxicants, drink and drugs. But sometimes it can be the arts. Many things in this world fill up our senses. And we become habituated to that process, just looking for the next sensual pleasure and stuck in it, seeking it, and then trying to hold on to it. These become like just channels in our mind, the way we think, habituated to thinking in these ways, seeking out the next pleasure without, if there's no mindfulness and reflection, then it just becomes daily habits that bind us to certain kinds of behavior, certain ways of thinking. You expose that when you practice meditation, because you're setting aside a lot of your desires and the objects of your desire when you meditate. You turn your attention inwards to the breath, or to another meditation object, where your mind often doesn't like that. It wants to get back to where the pleasure is. So you have this little tussle going on in your mind. The desire for things, remembering past pleasures, imagining future pleasures, not being very satisfied or content in the present moment. And unless we establish some mindfulness and investigate this, then we just get stuck into ruts. It's a word I used to use a lot when I was a kid. Didn't like being in a rut, a way of thinking. It's just habitual over and over again. But really life is full of ruts, isn't it? All these desires and attachments we get used to, and they're like ruts in the mind that we just fall into. Ruts of seeking pleasure and happiness, ruts of negative thinking. When we feel disappointed and depressed, often it's a kind of a negative rut we've fallen into, only seeing the bad in things. One of the uplifting things about the Dhamma and what the Buddha taught is that it doesn't have to be like this. And when you come back to reflecting on the Buddha, the awakened Buddha, or recollecting the Buddha through seeing those relics, the Buddha relics, it's just a simple reminder that the mind doesn't have to go into those ruts of desire and aversion all the time. Doesn't have to keep following habitual ways of thinking or even practices and activities. The Buddha has shown us a way to the awakened state, and that's what we're cultivating, the awakened state of mind through our meditation. This is what we're learning and cultivating through the practice. We have to learn how to question things. It's another way we wake the mind up to the truth, to get out of those ruts. And once you maybe become aware of how your mind falls into these different ruts, always going after pleasure, rejecting the unpleasant or the boring or the uninteresting, then you have to, the next step is, well, how can I change that? So the Buddha has changed his mind, and all the arahants have changed their minds, got out of those ruts. How can I do that? So the Buddha encouraged us to develop sati, mindfulness, and then investigate the Dhamma, develop clarity. Not just to accept the old habits all the time and falling into those ruts and those channels and ways of thinking, but to question. Question what you believe in, what you think, your views on things. And this is especially in the beginning of Buddhism, this is a big part of our practice. You're just questioning what you normally believe in and accept as true, as right. Because some of our ways of thinking are definitely incorrect because they bring us suffering. If you've noticed you've got suffering, then there must be some incorrect thinking or viewing going on. You must be stuck in a rut. And if you've already practiced meditation, you've probably noticed it already, how you have habits of getting irritated, annoyed, or just downright angry with things. Habits of always seeking the objects of your desire to get more pleasure, more success, more fame, more fortune, whatever it is that you aspire to and want. You'll have noticed these habits already, but you'll have also hopefully seen that they don't bring complete satisfaction to the mind. They agitate the mind and bring suffering. So then how can you get out of that? Well, you have to question. Literally, if you're walking along a path and you fall off the path, sometimes you walk in the forest, you're on a path which is raised above the ground either side. In the old days in Thailand, we used to walk through the paddy fields and the pathways are on the raised part of the field. And sometimes if you're not watching, you fall off into the field. If you're walking through the forest here, you can walk off the path into the forest. We slip into ruts all the time because we lose our mindfulness and we don't question or investigate our experience. So part of meditation is just learning how to question, how to see how we're falling into yet another rut, going into the aversion or the desire. And bring our mind back to the path, to mindfulness. The quality of mindfulness is it brings this awareness of phenomena, keeping the mind in the center. So it brings with it equanimity, a place of centeredness, balance, where you're neither falling into aversion or attraction. So you're knowing experience but not getting caught up in it. And this is what we're aiming for as we meditate, to pull the mind back from its ruts, its habits. Because these habits feed more ignorance, more of the unawakened state that leads to suffering. So establishing mindfulness, and pulling the mind back to the place in the center, it's the way out of suffering. And then you can contemplate what's going on. You can see, well, those thoughts and those desires are impermanent anyway. They arise, they pass away. And when you're mindful, you can see that. When we're not mindful, it's like we're falling into yet another rut, just the same old train of thought, negative emotion, discontent, seeking something else, something better, never happy, never satisfied. When we establish mindfulness, it's like you can step back from now, step back up, onto the path, or we're out of the rut. Your awareness is heightened, improved. If you keep doing that through practice, then you fall into ruts less and less. You'll feel less depressed, less anxious, and less discontent with your life. You notice when mindfulness is there, then the mind is satisfied in the present moment. It's at ease within itself. And you can break through some of these habits. And this fetter of Silapata Paramasa, sometimes they describe it as blindly or fumbling around in the way you do things. So even in meditation that can be the case. So your body is sitting there meditating, or you're walking meditation up and down, or you're sitting there, but the mind is just following its habits, thinking many thoughts, not really mindful in the present moment. You may even, at the end of your meditation session, say, well, I've meditated for 30 minutes or an hour. But your mind wasn't really in it. And then you're really reinforcing the fetter of attachment to rituals and practices, because you're just doing it in a mechanical way, where the body is there but the mind is not really there. Every aspect of our practice is like that. So when people practice generosity, often they're doing it but without full mindfulness, so they're doing it without realizing what they're doing. The body is doing it, but the mind is not fully aware of letting go. So in that moment, if you're practicing generosity in one way or another, letting go of some attachment, that's your aim. But then if you're not fully aware, you might not realize what you're doing. Sometimes even practicing generosity but wanting something in return. Rather than letting go, it's a desire to get something. So often we are doing it to receive approval or praise from others, or we have some long-term goal. We want to attain good rebirth, or get some happiness from what we're doing, or expect other people to treat us differently from what we're doing because of what we're doing. So far from cutting through the fetter, or rubbing away the fetter of attachment, it's actually increasing our fetters as we're doing it. Maybe increasing a wrong view, or increasing a sense of self, even though we're practicing generosity. Same with precepts. Holding precepts, which is generally a good thing, but then if the state of mind behind the action is still one of wanting to gain something from it. Sometimes we want to gain a sense of superiority, or being a better person, and then it leads us to look down on other people, criticize other people who don't keep the precepts as well as us. Or just keeping the precepts in this sort of mechanical way, perfunctory way, we just think that's enough to purify the mind from those mental defilements which the precepts work on. But maybe we're just keeping precepts just because we're following other people, or maybe even afraid of some kind of punishment from someone. Not keeping the precepts, not following the rules with full awareness. So the Buddha actually encouraged us to always establish mindfulness and investigate or even question what we're doing, even when we're doing good things. To be clear why we're doing it, what are we doing, what's the aim? Are we rubbing away cutting through these fetters, or are we building up the fetters more? Building up a stronger sense of self, self-view, attachment to the sense of self, the things we identify with as self, so attaching to the happiness of what we're doing, the pleasure, which will also condition more suffering without realizing it. Say you keep precepts as diligently as you can, you believe you're keeping them, and then one day someone comes along and says, you're not a very ethical person, or they criticize you in one way or another, or say you're just attached to your precepts, you don't really know what you're doing. And maybe if you build up a sense of self in that, then you suffer. Maybe someone says you're not a good Buddhist, they question what you're doing, or you don't really do what the Buddha taught. Maybe you get aversion and get annoyed, because without realizing it, the fetter of self-view had been increased by keeping the precepts. Or keeping the precepts without clarity becomes silapata paramasa. Often the words of other people test us. That's why we call them the 8 worldly winds. Like tonight we got a wind outside blowing things around. The views and opinions of other people often test our own attachments. So if they criticize us, then we have to think, well, what are they saying? Is it true or not? If we're just blindly attaching to our precepts or our meditation, maybe we've had some good meditation in the past, I know how to meditate, I can be mindful, and then someone criticizes you and says, no, you're not. What does it do? Does it bring aversion? Or do we rush to defend ourselves because of the fetter of self-view? Yes. So they criticize us and say, no, it's not true what you say. I can meditate, or I keep the precepts, or I'm generous. I'm following what the Buddha taught. I'm a good Buddhist. We can still suffer with these things. Sometimes it's self-doubt. The third fetter that we're dealing with in the beginning of our practice, vicikicca, uncertainty, doubt. Sometimes that's to do with ourselves. I'm not really good enough. So many Buddhists fall into feeling guilty or feeling full of self-doubt or even self-aversion. I have too many defilements, more than I can possibly deal with, too many fetters, too many ropes tying me down. So I want to give up straight away. Meditate a little bit and say, I can't meditate because I'm thinking too much. That's why we meditate. If we weren't thinking too much, we wouldn't need to meditate. But self-doubt comes in all the time, doesn't it? It leads us around. The mind can't settle down on an object. Sometimes we doubt our objects, so people move from meditation object or technique to technique. Try this a little bit, try that a little bit, because of doubt and uncertainty. Or we have uncertainty about our past karma, so I've got too much karma from the past, and I can't do it. The mind wavers. Uncertainty is one of the characteristics, is it's wavering. So again, it can be one of these worldly winds affects us. Notice how if your health is good, you can put effort into meditating, keeping precepts, practicing dana and generosity. But then if your health goes down, you say, I can't do it anymore. I can't meditate, can't listen to Dhamma, I can't concentrate, can't go to the temple, I can't do anything. Often a change in circumstances will waver the mind and bring up uncertainty. When that fetter's gone, then there's certainty. So like, say the stream enterer, they say they've entered the stream, meaning whatever happens after that, they no longer have any doubts about the practice, their ability to practice, the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, the nature of phenomena. They know phenomena arise and pass away and are not self. They still have other defilements, but the doubt and the uncertainty about the path, what is the path and not, is gone. So even if they fall ill, they're still certain about the practice. And they're not in doubt. They may have the physical discomfort of illness and all the obstacles that brings, but they don't have doubt about Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. But the unenlightened persons might get shaken by that. Illness, they get ill, I can't do it anymore, and give up. At the very time when the Dhamma could really help them, maybe they give up. They're shaken by uncertainty. Or it could be other things, the behavior of other people. That's a common one, isn't it? You try to practice Buddhism, be a good Buddhist, be generous, kind, compassionate, forgiving, meditate every day, keep the precepts, and then other people treat you badly or bully you or criticize you. And the self-doubt comes out. I've done all this good stuff, and then now they've got all these problems with other people and the world around me. What a terrible place. I give up. Give up on Buddhism, give up on practice. Some people even give up on Buddhism altogether and change religions. Pick up some other religion, some other system of training. What it really is just the wavering of the mind because of the uncertainty, the fetter of uncertainty. You haven't got enough confidence, haven't heard the Dhamma enough, practiced enough to be firm to get through whatever it is that's shaking us. The illness or the words of other people or the unpleasant situation we fall into sometimes. Sometimes it's because we've helped people. We help people a lot, and then turn around and they show no gratitude, or they even come back and harm us. People we've helped turn around and hurt us. And then it shakes your faith. We say it shakes your faith in the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, in your practice or in yourself. If you can establish mindfulness and investigate this, what it really is the fetter of uncertainty, vicikicca. The point of the practice is to cut through these fetters. Self-view, uncertainty, the blind attachment to practices and rituals. You cut through a fetter, that means it doesn't return. It doesn't rebind the mind to the world, to suffering. A certain amount of suffering is gone from the mind. Another way the Buddha talked about it is you close off the doors, the gateways to the lower realms, the ghost realms, animal realms, hell realms, meaning those unwholesome types of behavior through body, speech and mind no longer arise. The unskillful intentions that lead us to break precepts no longer arise. The fetters are broken. And it's not just when conditions are right, but it's when conditions are not right as well. When you're ill as well as when you're healthy, when people criticize you as well as when they praise you, when things go well, the world around you is smooth and easy as well as when it's not. And it's for life as well. Ajahn Chah used to joke, some of those stream enters, they were stream enters while things were going well, and then something came along to sway them from the path. So if it was a monk, maybe it was the attractive woman came along and made an offer, so they disrobed, and they said, oh, a lot of stream enters have got married now, gone off, given up the meditation and the practice. Sometimes it's something unpleasant, sometimes it's something pleasant, pulls you out away from the path. More short-term happiness. Sometimes it's something like an inheritance, a windfall. You win the lottery, or a relative dies, leaves you a lot of money. No need to meditate anymore. Just go off and spend my money. Live the easy life for a while until it runs out. Actually, the way the Buddha described the Sotapanna, he said the happiness of the stream enterer, it's greater than being the leader of a country, the prime minister or the president or the king or the queen. It's greater than having all the wealth, the land, the wealth of a country. Because this is inner wealth that is unshakable. Cutting fetters is not a small thing. It's taking away the causes of suffering from the mind. That way of thinking that takes everything personally. Every little bit of pain is my pain, every little problem is my problem. Takes that away, is no longer in the experience of the Sotapanna. They may still have some mild aversion and desire and attachments, but the kind of normal coarse kind of suffering is gone. Much better kind of happiness than the sort of short-term happiness we're usually chasing after. Money and wealth and status and power, influence. Sotapanna doesn't have to be an influence anymore, an influencer. And they don't have to go chasing after hits on YouTube or whatever, Instagram or Twitter. Doesn't matter anymore because there's this inner happiness that's always there, rain or shine, good weather, bad weather, praise or blame, gain or loss, good health, bad health, doesn't change. Until these three fetters are broken, then the mind is still bound up with the world, tied down to the world, like somebody who's kidnapped. If you were really kidnapped, you'd feel miserable until you escape, because you're bound, tied up somewhere in some dark room somewhere perhaps. You cut through these fetters and the mind is free. Whatever the situation, whatever the external conditions, it's free. It's got to be a better kind of happiness than just getting what you want. If you're always bound to, I'm happy when I get what I want and I'm unhappy when I don't get what I want, then your mind is never going to be free. It's just still caught up in conditions, still bound up with conditions. And every day the Buddha in his teachings and his own personal life story, as well as the story of all the arahants, it's reminding us of that. When you look at relics or you bow to relics, it's reminding you of that. True happiness is not in that getting that next short-term hit, that next short-term pleasure. It comes through developing clarity, insight into the way things are. Seeing that all that sensual happiness is impermanent. It's impermanent, it's not self. The real happiness is the mind that is equanimous, free, sees through to the true nature of things. Sees the pleasures of the world, however good they are, however stimulating they are, they're impermanent. They arise, they pass away. They're only that good. The happiness doesn't last. Because the happiness doesn't last, they're actually painful in their nature. It's just we don't see. The pain is hidden by the pleasure. So don't give up on your practice, whatever the worldly winds come your way, the gain, the loss, the pleasure, the pain, the praise, the blame and criticism. And don't let it affect you. Keep focused on the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, the path of practice, cultivating generosity, sila, morality, meditation, mindfulness, insight. Keep questioning your own thoughts and views. Don't just accept them the way they are. Don't just keep falling into those same old ruts of thinking. The aversion, the attraction, the happiness, the sadness. Keep your mind out of the ruts. Practice the mindfulness. Reflect on the impermanence of things. This will bring your mind to a better place, a more real kind of happiness. So I'll leave you with those reflections tonight.